Hi, everybody. I can't stop reading this book. Chapter 14 is called On the Way to New House. The old porcupine moved faster than Poppy thought possible, body swaying from side to side, quills rattling like a snare drum as he walked. The trail Aerith took was narrow but smooth, avoiding hills, tangles, and fallen trees. From time to time, Poppy saw other animals, weasels and a raccoon, a ferret, and once a bear. As soon as they caught sight of Aerith, they hurried away in haste. Poppy bounded along after Aerith, pausing now and again to gaze up at the endless, enticing forest with amazement and delight. In low places, white ground mist eddied gently, while above in high trees the early sun sowed gold sparks among the dark leaves. But once, while Poppy was staring wide-eyed at a particularly towering tree, she caught sight of what appeared to be a brown blur swooping among the pines, and instantly her joy melted. Aerith, she called. I think Mr. Okax is following us. Aerith, however, did no more than grunt, then press forward. Poppy caught up with him, and then from then on stayed as close as she could as possible. But with every third step, she glanced back. Finally, she actually saw Mr. Okax. He was high above, gliding through the treetops on widespread wings like a silent phantom. He is following, Poppy cried. Bug brain, Aerith mumbled. Then, no matter how much Poppy searched, her neck grew strained from so much turning and twisting. She lost sight of the owl. At last, she decided that he had gone. More relaxed, she paused now and again to take in the forest views. It was while she stopped to sniff a Scotch broom plant that Mr. Okax, out of nowhere, made a dive at her. Talons flashing. Okax! Aerith bellowed, and without looking, Poppy leaped toward Aerith for protection. The porcupine, for all of his bulk, whipped around and lifted his tail, prepared to strike with quills. Mr. Okax pulled up short and hissed venomously, flew aloft, and vanished. Oh, that was so close, Poppy panted. She was now trying to see where Mr. Okax had gone. What made you notice him? Poppy, if you think there's anything that's going to keep me from that salt, you don't know me. Once more, the porcupine trundled off down the trail. Aerith, Poppy panted, straining to keep up. I'm certain that Mr. Okax wants to keep me from New House. There must be something that he doesn't want me to see. Aerith stopped abruptly and gave a snort. Poppy, some creatures aren't worth trying to figure out. If they bother you, what I say is, swat them with your tail. Aerith, not every tail has quills like yours. You're right. I shouldn't hold yours against you. He set off again. Aerith, Poppy said after a while, if I could just find out what it was that Mr. Okax is frightened of and tell my family. Here's a picture. Hopefully you can see that. So she was saying, if I could just find out what it was that Mr. Okax is frightened of and tell my family, I wouldn't even care what happened to me. Aerith laughed sarcastically. Even if it kills you? Well, no, but Poppy, if you don't stay alive, the only thing you'll be good for is maggot mash. Yuck. As they traveled farther, Poppy noticed that the trees were growing less dense. There were greater varieties of flowers, too. As the brightness intensified, Poppy guessed that they were reaching more of the northern limits of the forest. Here's a picture. Aerith, she said, when we get out of the woods, where will we be? First, there's a dirt road and an old barn, then a field of corn, and beyond the field is some low grass. Then the buildings where the people live. There's also a new big barn. That's for the chickens. What are people like? Poppy asked. Other than pictures in magazines back home, she really had never seen any humans. They don't bother me. Do they dance a lot? What's dancing? It's gliding, swirling, dipping, and sliding with someone you like. You are strange, the porcupine said. Now, don't try to distract me. On the short grass, not far from the cornfield, is the salt lick. You figure a way to get it for me yet, have you? Aerith, I haven't even seen it, Poppy answered. Oh, it's beautiful, Poppy, Aerith murmured. Really beautiful. They had reached the north edge of Dimwood Forest. Beyond the last of the tall trees, Poppy saw the dirt road. Even farther was a dilapidated barn, smaller than Grey House and considerably older. It stood on the edge of a field, leaning over slightly. The field itself was full of tall stalks bearing plump and tasseled ears of corn, tossed by a gentle breeze, row by row, rustled and whispered with heavy ripeness. Aerith trotted off across dirt road. Come on now, move it, the porcupine scolded once he looked back and saw Poppy on the other side. I'm checking for Mr. Oakhax, Poppy called across, though since the owl's one attempt to grab her, she had not seen him. Deciding that he was either gone or hiding, she darted across the dirt road and rejoined Aerith. Let's go, the porcupine cried, and plunged into the cornfield, beating his way through the stiff stalks. Poppy paused now and again in his wake to snack on a few fallen corn, which lay in about great quantity. Compared with the fallow fields that the mice scurried near Grey House, the profusion of food here was a marvel. Back home, the food that the family had access to took long hours to find, and there really wasn't much of it. Here was food enough to feed a family twice their size. Was it this rich field that Mr. Oakhax wished to hide? Did he want her family to go hungry? All that searching for food out in the open did make them more vulnerable. Maybe he wanted that. There, Aerith cried when they finally burst through the far side of the cornfield. Look! Poppy sat up. Before her was a neatly chopped grass lawn, and not far from them stood a smooth, shiny pole as high as a cornstalk. It was capped by a large block of white salt. Isn't that something? Aerith whispered. Poppy glanced at her friend. He was drooling. Now that Poppy could see what she had promised to bring Aerith, her heart sank. How in the world would she be able to do it? It was perfectly clear that even if she could manage to get the salt off the pole, it was too huge for her to carry. The problem itself was too huge to carry, not to mention the salt block. With a sigh, Poppy looked farther. Beyond the salt lick was a white house. It bore some resemblance to Grey House, but its paint was bright and its windows were newly curtained. Signs that suggested that people were living there. Was that what Mr. Oakhax didn't like? Was that what he didn't want them to know about? Poppy turned to the left and saw a red barn. It was considerably larger than the house, but it only had a few windows. The roof was pitched high and covered with sheet metal. At the far end of the barn, the roof jutted out to form a door hood. Poppy gasped, sitting right below the overhang. Near a large closed window was an owl twice the size of Mr. Okax. Here's a picture of Poppy with the salt lick. Can you see it? And that's the end of our chapter.